Thank the Lord for all He is, all He does, and all He gives us in our life. Good morning. God bless you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for tuning in online. Welcome to First Easter Resurrection Sunday service for Beyond Belief Christian Discipleship. In case you didn't know, I've been dreaming about this planting this church for 21 years. Been extremely busy in the meantime, taking all types of religion classes and leadership and biblical leadership and group dynamics and sociology and psychology and all types of classes to try to get ready. Um, even so, when the time has actually come, even though the time has actually come, I'm still just still nervous. I guess it's probably also excitement, just ecstatic that the Lord is bringing the dreams into fruition and He's making the dreams a reality and not just figments of my imagination that people could dismiss me as being is hoping for too much. So we're here today to talk about the Easter season. Today commemorates the day that Jesus um, rose again from death into life, and he overcame death and the grave. But I'm going to kind of backstep a little bit to talk about Friday, talk about the Passover. The Hebrew word for it is Pesach. Um, in case you haven't really read much in the Exodus, let me just kind of give you a quick overview of that before we move into what Jesus did in his life. As you may know, even from watching the Prince of Egypt movie, Moses spoke to the king of Kemet, or the Melech Mitzrayim, or as we come to call him, which is not exactly correct, we call him Pharaoh. But ultimately, Moses was too afraid to speak to him on his own, so God recruited his brother Aaron. Aaron was about 3 years older than Moses, but in any sense, Moses brought his big brother to speak to the king of Kemet on his behalf. And some people might think that I'm just using Kemet is not exactly a biblical name, but it does kind of trace back to Mitzrayim being a son of Ham, and actually the Hebrew name is Ham, and not just Ham, based on the Hebrew letters that are used to spell his name. In any sense, God sent 10 plagues on the Kemetic people to upset the religio-political structure of that day, to show that He was God supreme over anything and everything that anyone might consider a God. Long story short, God sends the 10 plagues, but before He sends the 10th plague, after the 9th plague being the palpable darkness, in other words, darkness so thick that you can feel it. You may have seen something like this in horror movies where there's like a big dark cloud swirling and kind of reaches out and grabs people. But those are imaginings of revisiting of what this must have felt like. And beginning in Exodus chapter 11, God starts to prepare the Hebrew people for what we now call the Passover. And it would ultimately be the death of the firstborn human and livestock. And but what the preparation that God gave the Hebrews was to take a 1-year-old lamb or goat and to kill it and to use its blood to paint on the outside of the doorposts and the crossbar of their house, of their residence. And then after, they wouldn't just throw the lamb's body away, they would actually eat it as part of the Pesach Seder. Say that again, it's Pesach Seder, which literally means Passover meal. And on their plate, in the upper left-hand corner of their plate, would be the charoset, which is a mixture of apples, nuts, and honey. They would have the lamb meat, and they would put the bones in the upper right-hand corner when they were finished. In the bottom left corner, they would have maror, which translates to bitter herbs. And in the bottom right corner, they would have roasted eggs. And on the side, they would have a bowl of salt water. tears they cried while in slavery. Um, he explained that the roasted eggs had two purposes. It symbolized tears from suffering because of its shape, but it also symbolized fertility in spite of Malak Mitzrayim's plan to wipe out all the children aged 2 and under, which is how Moses ultimately found his way into the palace to become a prince of Egypt. Moving on, they've since adopted a tradition of reading the Haggadah, which is basically a prayer book about Exodus, but it doesn't mention Moses or even Aaron because it doesn't. Well, it doesn't mention Moses because it doesn't want him to become an object of worship. It also has become tradition for the youngest child to ask 4 questions in the form of a song, to sing 4 questions. Those 4 questions are: for all other nights we eat bread, leavened or unleavened. Why on this night do we only eat unleavened bread? Excuse me. Question number 2, on all other nights we eat all kinds of herbs. Why on this night only bitter herbs? On all other nights we need not dip our herbs even once. Why on this night must we dip them twice? On all other nights we eat either sitting up or reclining. Why on this night do we all recline? Traditions say that the liturgy from Exodus 13 answers those questions. It could be sung or spoken, and basically they would take as long as the child had interest and asked questions. They would stay up potentially all night to answer the child's questions. What we know of history is that many Jews have rejected the one we call Jesus as the anointed one, even though he did the miracles from God, even though his cousin baptized him and the dove descended upon him, even though he was the Son of God. A lot of Jews don't accept him, even a lot of Muslims don't accept Jesus as the Son of God for their varying reasons. But still, to prove that Jesus was the Son of God, let us examine some moments from his life. Yehochanan, the immerser, whom we call John the Baptist, was among those who anticipated his appearance. In John chapter 1, verses 19 through 28, John has to explain that he himself is not the anointed one. Because at that point, in that time frame, the Jews were looking for somebody to overthrow the Romans, and they wanted, political freedom. And so, to be honest, it's not dissimilar. Their position in society was not dissimilar to being black in America. However, not all blacks in America, not blacks in America typically aren't necessarily seeking independence from white people, but there is a certain sentiment of second-class citizen, not having the freedom to practice, whatever religion you want or whatever the case might be. So it's a little different, but one might make that comparison and might be able to make sense of that comparison. But in any sense, the day after was recorded in John chapter 1, verses 19 through 28. Begins with verse 29 and ends in verse 34. John sees his cousin coming from a distance, approaching for immersion for baptism. And he says, "Look, God's Lamb, the one who is taking away the sin of the world. This is the man about whom I was talking. After me," when I said, "After me is coming someone who has rank above me, because he existed before me. I myself did not know who he was, but the reason I came immersing with water was so that he might be made known to Israel." Then John gave his testimony. "I saw the Spirit coming down from the heavens like a dove and remaining on him. I myself did not know who he was, but the one who sent me to immerse in water said to me, 'The one on whom you see the Spirit descending and remaining, This is the one who immerses in Ruach HaKodesh, which means the Holy Spirit. And I have seen and borne witness that this is the Son of God. Again, that's John chapter 1, verses 29 through 34. Now, after some time, John's students, not John himself, but John's students, send an inquiry to Jesus and his followers, and basically ask, if we have to fast all the time, and even if the Pharisees fast all the time, why is it that the people who follow you don't fast? Like, why do they just get to eat and drink and be merry, so to speak, but the rest of us are fasting and praying and waiting on the anointed one? Ultimately, Jesus says he's the Messiah, but he says it in a encoded, encrypted kind of way. He says, if the wedding guest, I said, why would the wedding guest fast or not celebrate when the bridegroom is with them? Now, if they didn't really, like I said, it could be kind of too encrypted, but basically he was saying that I'm the one you've been waiting for. So there's no need to fast and pray and wait for me to come if I'm here. That's what Jesus was saying when he said that. You can also read that if you want to see in Matthew chapter 9, verses 14 through 17. Because he thought that may be a little too encrypted for him, he also gave the example of not putting new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, it may, when the wine oxidizes and expands and ferments, turns from grape juice into wine as we know it now. It expands to the point that if you put old wine in new wineskins, then you can potentially burst the wineskins and then everything's wasted. I once asked a Hebrew teacher about this, and he explained it to the process to rejuvenate old wineskins. You can, spray them. You can cut the seams and spread them all out, and you can spray it with water, and you beat it with a whip, and you just keep doing it over and over and over until you rejuvenate the skin of the wineskin, and then you can sew it back up and reuse it for new wine. Then that won't cause it to burst. But generally speaking, that process is so long and so tedious that it's kind of a moot point. So basically, what you want to do is when you have old wineskin, just put old wine in it. In any sense, to stick with Jesus' story and to not get lost in my nerdiness, I moved on to Matthew chapter 11, verses 2 through 15, when John had been incarcerated. And, maybe it doesn't really explain what his motive were, as far as maybe, he gotten older and kind of got some kind of amnesia, or maybe there were just so many false anointed ones who had pointed to themselves as the anointed one. John had just kind of sent this same type of envoy to multiple potential messiahs. And so when this envoy, this group of messengers, comes to Jesus of Nazareth, they relay the message: are you the one coming, or shall we expect someone else? Excuse me. And in response to this, Jesus said, as you depart, report to John what you see and hear. Blind people see again, lame legs walk around, those with skin diseases are cleansed, deaf people hear, dead people rise up, and the poor shall preach the good news of the kingdom. And he is well positioned for success unless he takes offense with me. Verse 7, and as these people departed, Jesus began saying to the multitudes about John. Now he starts to brag on John, and he gets sarcastic with those people because they kind of went out to the desert to kind of check on John and see what they might see. But Jesus, he puts them in their place. He says, well, why did you go out to the desert? To see for yourselves? What did you expect to see? A reed swaying in the breeze? Yet why did you go out? A man adorned in soft robes? Listen, the ones who wear the soft robes are in the houses of kings. Brother, what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, he's a prophet, and so much more than that. He's the one about whom it's written, listen, I send my messenger before you, one who shall prepare the way for you. Honestly, I tell you, of those born of women, not one who has appeared is greater than John who baptizes. but least significant, but the one who's least significant in the kingdom of heaven is greater than him. But the days of John, who baptized until now, the kingdom of the heavens suffered violence, and the violent people snatched it, which is evidenced by John being in prison. For all the prophets in the Torah before John proclaimed the divine message. And if you are willing to grasp it, he is the Eliyahu who must appear. The one having ears to hear, let him listen. And so basically, Jesus was saying of his cousin, he called his cousin a messenger, or the same Hebrew word, malachi, which means my angel. He was saying that John is the greatest human ever, but even so, John, being the greatest human ever, he's still less significant than the least in the kingdom of heaven. So what the people didn't really get at that time frame is Jesus was installing his Father's kingdom. And they were, like I said, they wanted him to mount up an army, raise up an army, and try to overthrow the Romans. So they had like the wrong focus. They were looking for a political kingdom, but he was trying to set up his Father's kingdom in the hearts and minds of those who might believe. And so, so even at his crucifixion, a lot of people didn't get it. They saw him being crucified, and they lost heart. They got discouraged. But Matthew 27 verse 54 says that one of the Roman soldiers who was there at the crucifixion, who was standing guard so that nobody would try to come up and take his body down off the cross. After the thunder and lightning, the earthquakes that happened at Jesus' death, the Roman soldier said, truthfully, this man was God's son. And so, like over the next couple of days, overnight, late Friday evening, and all day Saturday. I'm sorry, actually, excuse me, late Friday evening and during the day Saturday. So basically, prior to sunset, these people were mourning and frustrated and upset. But as the scripture progresses, we get into Matthew 28. But while it was still dark on Shabbat, Miriam of Magdala, which we know as Mary Magdalene, and the other Mary came to observe the tomb. And listen, an enormous earthquake happened. For after an angel of the Lord descended from the heavens, when he approached, he rolled the stone away, and he himself was sitting on it. But his appearance was like lightning, and his garment was white as snow. And from the fear of him, those who had been guarding the tomb trembled and passed out. Your translation might read, they were as the dead ones, but basically they trembled and passed out. In response to this, the angel said to the women, you must not be afraid, for I understand that you seek Jesus who has been crucified. For he is not here, he has been raised, just as he said. Come, examine the place where he was laid. And quickly, after you are gone, I tell you, after you are gone from here, tell his disciples, he is raised from the dead, and listen, he goes before you into the Galilee, or into Galilee, as we call it in English, and there you shall see him. Listen, I have told you. So they get up from the tomb, and with fear, yet also great joy, and they run and report it to his disciples. And listen, Jesus met them, and he says, hey, you. And after they approached, they recognized him, they grasped his feet, and they worshiped him. And then Jesus says to them, don't be afraid. Go report to my brothers in order that they might meet me in Galilee, and there they shall see me. I think it's in Luke where it kind of goes into more detail about how when they saw him, they wanted to thrust their finger into his side before they would actually believe. But ultimately, so much of the people who had the disciples who believed and they followed him for 2.5 years, close to 3 years, a lot of them scattered when he was crucified. So a lot of them were going to various places, but the 12 remained, actually the 11, because Judas met an untimely fate. And so later on, when Jesus speaks to them in the Galil. It doesn't exactly say how many days passed, but let's see. Verse 11 through 15 does say that the people, the guards came together and they came up with a plan to lie to the people and to say that that the disciples came and stole the body. And so they received a certain amount of money for it. And so they took the silver and they went out and spread the lie as they were taught. And then, excuse me, this account spread widely among the Jews until this very day, what the text says, but I'm assuming it's like 65 AD at the latest, because of the timing of the Jewish-Roman War. But in any sense, a lot of people, a lot of Jews didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah because of the fact that he didn't mount up an army, and because of the fact that these soldiers lied to certain people to say that he didn't really rise from the dead. It was just that his disciples came and stole the body, which even though it had been a slight against them because they were armed, trained Roman soldiers, how would they let a band of fishermen steal a body from them? It doesn't really make sense, but in any sense, that's the lie that they told and a lot of people believe. Well, verse 16 through 20 in chapter 28 of the book of Matthew. But the 11 disciples are gone into the Galil, into the mountain where Yeshua directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but they doubted. And when Yeshua approached, he spoke to them, and he says, "All authority in the heavens and on the earth is given to me. So after you are gone, make disciples of all the nations, as you baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe everything I have commanded you. And look, I am with you every day until the end of the age." So, as we take this time to celebrate his life, birth, death, ministry, and resurrection, it's important to remember, not only did he do so many miracles in his lifetime, but he has all power and authority in the kingdom of the heavens and on the earth. And right now, he's at his Father's right hand pleading our case. So what I would challenge you to do today, and as we move forward for the rest of our lives, is to to ask him to show you what is your place in his kingdom. What is the thing, the task he would give you to do specifically, and ask him to help you build your network the way he wants you to build it. We don't serve a God who is made of stone or made of wood or is limited to a JPEG or something like that. We serve the God who overcame death. We serve the God who is boundless, who is limitless, who is timeless. We serve the God who not even death can hold him down. Not even, even though he endured death, he suffered for our sake. He took the sins and the shame and the guilt and the pain on himself for our sake. Even so, when he left the death shroud behind and he rose from the dead, that proved he had power over death. That was something that, even though he had raised people from the dead, a lot of people just didn't really understand. They didn't really think that was something that was possible. And there wasn't a widespread belief that that people could just die and then like 2.5, 3 days later just get back up of their own volition and just just kind of keep on living. But ultimately, in any sense, Jesus was one who did that, and so that's the reason why. That's the reason why he's special in our lives. Because of the things that he has done, because of miracles that he renders in our life. He can do those same types of miracles through us if we're willing and if we're in position to do the right things through him. And something else that I know that a lot of times people want to see, when people get saved, they want to give the tongues. And that's one of the spiritual gifts, yes it is, but that's not the most important. That's not, because you speak in tongues, and somebody might say, oh, he speaks in tongues. But ultimately, that's just really, it's just a prayer language between you and the Father. But when you pray for the gifts, don't just pray for the gifts of speaking in tongues. Pray for the gifts of healing people. Pray for the gifts of having the right words to say. Pray for the gifts of having discernment, so that you can manifest his kingdom. So that as he told his disciples, make disciples in all the earth, teaching them to observe and understand everything I've taught you. If
we just speak in tongues and have a prayer language with him, that's all well and good. We have a father-son relationship, father-daughter relationship. But, you know, as you look at, even as you look at the cross, it wasn't just a vertical beam, it was a vertical beam and a horizontal beam. So what that symbolizes is that we have to have a relationship with the Father, that's true, but we also have to have a relationship with our siblings and him, so that we can reach out to whosoever needs his love through us. You know, if we just keep his love for ourselves and we're selfish with it, then we're not really worthy of it. But if we share his love with whosoever might need it, then we bring more people into his kingdom, and then we put them in a position where we can teach them to observe everything he has shown us. So that's my challenge to you this weekend moving forward, is we just we celebrate his life and his ministry and his death and his resurrection. And 7 weeks later, you read the book of Acts chapter 1. You read about his ascension and the angels, you know, asking the men of Galilee, why are you looking at the heavens? Because he said, you know, he said he's going to ascend and he said he's going to come back. You know, but we can't just wait for him to come back. We have to do the miracles in the life. We have to manifest his kingdom on the earth right now while we're here. You know, because if we only wait for him to come back, you know, then ultimately what good have we made of the time that he has given us? So that's my challenge moving forward, is to make the most of the time that he has given us on this earth and to not take it for granted. Big time. God bless.